So, gosh, well, first of all, I want to thank you for doing this, and you have so much experience. Where do we start? But
That's just another word for old.
right, no. Old is like 95 or something. But the reason why I really wanted to interview you, other than having a ton of experience, is that you did such an incredible job during the Highland Park tragedy. I watched your station for at least 8 hours straight. I was supposed to go to Evanston to a parade. I was supposed to go to the fireworks, etc. And obviously they were canceled. But what happened that day of that tragedy on July 4th?
Well, like so many other people, I had the day off. I was lucky, There are no, newsrooms are populated by people that work holidays, and I'm lucky I was not working that one. But oddly enough, I was on vacation. It was the first day of a week of vacation, and I saw what was happening. I texted my boss. I said, "Do you need me to come in?" He just said yes.
Wow.
I went straight to the scene. We didn't know what I was going to do. I actually beat my cameraman there because he was coming from the far south side of Chicago. And I will tell you that the whole thing was very eerie. When I got there, it was just this strange quiet. And everything was frozen in time. It was everybody had run out of there in a panic. The street had been blocked off with police tape, and then everything was exactly as it was. So strollers, bicycles, little mementos of a 4th of July parade, chairs that had been set up, overturned, just everything exactly as it was the second the shooting began. The only thing missing was the people. Now, there were two things that were really, really chilling, and we find things chilling just like the public does. Two things that were really, really chilling was, number one, the intense police presence and going door to door in the stores there along the street in Highland Park, because they were worried the gunman was still there. And then every now and then, and this was 2-3 hours after the shooting, 4 hours after the shooting, you would see a group of people being ushered out that were still hiding in one particular business. I remember one really compelling scene where a group of ballet students, these were all young girls, maybe 13, 14 years old, all being ushered out by an armed policeman, being led to safety, if you will, down the street, because they were still hiding and were being brought out and being taken to a place where they could be reunited with their family.
So you were planning to take the day off, and then how long were you there for?
Oh, I was there till 10 o'clock that night. I came in the next day. I worked that. And when I say 10 o'clock, I was there till, for our 10 o'clock news. And then, of course, the next day was a very, very active day because the suspect, Robert Crimo, had, of course, been arrested the day before. But, there was plenty that we were trying to learn about him. And then that's my cap. These are things that happen during these live stream events. And of course, a lot of public officials came in. The vice president came in. Nightly News was anchoring from the scene. We were anchoring from the scene, and that involves just a tremendous amount of infrastructure to bring in. But at the same time, you're trying to do the story. So thank goodness we've got great technical people that take care of that part, and you just show up and stand where they tell you to stand. I must tell you also, Margaret, and this is really super important that I say this, and that is that I just can't say enough about law enforcement up there. And I am not a person who will not criticize law enforcement where it's appropriate. Just look at the stories I do. If this had been the Chicago Police Department handling this, it would have been an unmitigated disaster because they wouldn't have said anything. On the other hand, the Major Crimes Task Force, the Lake County Sheriff's Office, and the Highland Park Police were holding hourly briefings up there. Chris Cavelli, I cannot say enough about the job he did up there. And that's important for one reason, and that is you've got a public that has a gunman on the loose. They don't know where he is. And if nothing else, it's important to just go on and assure them whether or not they need to be worried, whether they need to keep their children locked in the basement. And they did the best job of staying in touch with their local community of any crisis situation like this I've seen in a long time.
Is it because of Chris Cavelli, who I think is incredible? Because I've had a column too from WBBM News Radio, and I'm just a schmo, and he always responds, and he responds to emails, etc.
Well, you're not a schmo, first of all, but number two, yeah, he's a real professional. I got to know him during the Glenowitz investigation up what was that? Probably 4 years ago, and he handled that unbelievably well. And he's just a solid guy that believes in giving out accurate information. And what a refreshing idea. And this is kind of one of my pet peeves and one of my crusades. And he's one of the people that really walks the walk and really believes in that. And it really shows.
So why aren't other departments like that?
I don't know. And it's getting worse. And we can talk about that. But it is, I will tell you that in my career, which started in 1975, it's the worst it's ever been. And these public agencies, police and other agencies in various places, Chicago's the worst, believe they don't have a responsibility and any compelling responsibility for accountability. And exactly the opposite is true. Chicago police are right now at the point, Chicago police will not do an interview now at all on any topic. If you call up seeking an interview with the Chicago Police Department, you're lucky if you even get a response. And that to me is the complete opposite of civic engagement.
Why are they like that?
I don't know. It began getting bad under Rahm Emanuel. We would never have dreamed we would look back on the Daley years as the salad days of journalism, but compared to the way things are now, the Daley administration was really open. And under Lori Lightfoot, it's gotten a lot worse. And David Brown has basically sent out an edict to his troops not to cooperate. And so, we did a major investigation of hit and run accidents in Chicago. Chicago police have just an abysmal track record on clearance rates and hit and run accidents. And, it made them look really bad. And I said to him, look, you really need to respond to this. If there is a reasonable explanation for why you guys are so terrible at this, let's hear it. Are these accidents difficult to solve? Is it hard to get witnesses to come forward? Is it difficult to prove who was driving the car, even though you've got the car? You guys are smart people. Come on, let's sit down. Let's bring a television camera. Let's do an interview. They wouldn't even respond to those requests. And to me, that's just appalling.
Well, you mentioned the dailies. So are you saying that the mayor sets the tone for media engagement with the police?
I think so. It absolutely, we found that to be true under Rahm Emanuel. And, Rahm Emanuel was a professional guy. I mean, in some respects, he ran a good city, but he was suspicious of us. And, Margaret, maybe people are right to be suspicious of us for only one respect, if they've got something they don't want us to know. Let me give you a ridiculous example. When I was a little kid, I used to read Mad Magazine. And this was back in the Cold War. This was in the 60s. And I'll never forget, a lot of people don't know this, but Mad Magazine used to have on the masthead every month, would have a quote from their mascot, Alfred E. Newman. And he was the guy that was on the cover of every issue of Mad Magazine. And I'll never forget that at the heart of the Cold War, there was a quote that said, if communism is such a big success, why don't they put up a picture window instead of an iron curtain? And what does it say to you? I'm still quoting that all these years later. Well, that's true of government. If everything's going great, if you guys are so smart, and if you're doing such a great job, then you won't have any problem showing it to me or telling me what it is or talking to me. And this administration in Chicago right now is, to use scripture, hiding their light under a bushel. And it is not the proper way to do business in the public square.
Well, I'm surprised if it's like that, why people have not found out really the reason, or if it's just the culture. Is it also because has the media done harsh stories about them, or?
Well, it invites harsh stories. That's the ironic thing. Instead of a bid for, if you will, sympathetic media treatment, what it does is it invites just the opposite. It invites us to say, well, what is it exactly that you don't want us to know? And, when it comes to Chicago, there's plenty of there. And for instance, my colleagues at Channel 5 tonight are doing a story on carjackings. The Chicago Police Department put out some numbers on carjackings that were just wrong. And you can use the city's own data to show that it's wrong. David Brown got up and popped off about how he doesn't have the right resources, and about how New York police have all these helicopters. Well, we contacted the New York police and they said, we don't know what he's talking about. We don't have all those helicopters. So, I mean, some of these things just require a phone call. And here's the thing. The Chicago Police Department has some amazing people doing amazing work in dangerous areas. They have incredible success stories to tell. They won't do that. They won't tell their success stories. They won't tell any stories. They feel it is not their responsibility to answer anyone's questions. And I believe that's wrong.
But they have people working for them who are media. They can put out these good stories of accomplishments. Yeah,
in fact, it's a good point. I said one time to their director of news affairs, I said, you're not very good at what you do, because if I were you, I'd be beating my door down every day saying, hey, you want to come interview, Officer so-and-so, he cracked the case of whatever. Or, hey, what you want to go see the forensic unit where they managed to lift fingerprints off of dirt and solved a crime, and we'll show you how he did it, and blah, blah, blah. I said, if you guys were smart, you'd be keeping me busy with all of these stories. But instead, not only are you not answering my questions, but you're just sitting there silent. I must tell you, we have actually entertained the idea. Don't tell anybody this. We have actually entertained the idea of just doing a story on the budget of the Office of News Affairs, because we can't figure out what they do. I mean, and if that's the case, why do we have them? I mean, if you have all of these people assigned to news affairs that are drawing salaries on the public nickel, you'd think that the citizens and the taxpayers would be getting a little more bang for their buck.
Well, another thing about the carjackings isn't the sheriff also involved in that?
Yeah, well, in other areas in suburban Cook County, yes.
So are they more open?
Cook County Sheriff's Office is incredibly open. And whenever we want to talk to them, they say, when would you like to come out? And if you call them up and say, we'd like to do a story on such and such deep inside Cook County Jail, they say, we can arrange that. I have never been turned down on anything from the Cook County Sheriff. And I think they run a very, very open operation.
Maybe somebody should do a story about the lack of transparency of the Chicago police itself, not just the budget, but what's going on and how it's changed. Somebody can even do an online thing. Well,
I just think it's unfortunate. And for what we do, contact with the police it's sort of the raw materials of journalism. And Margaret, there's one thing that I've always felt, and this comes to FOIA, for example. FOIA is a large lifeblood of what I do. And I've kind of told public officials that I have a simple belief when it comes to FOIA, and that is that if the taxpayers paid to have something done, I have a right to see it. And, if the taxpayers paid to have a report prepared by a cop, I have a right to have a copy of the report. It's not very complicated. And, what's funny is we will go off to, IRE conventions and investigative reporters and editors, and you'll hear all these folks telling about how they did stories, and they'll say, well, we called up and we got the police report and blah, blah, and we'll say, whoa, what?
Was that in other states? Was that in other states?
Well, yeah, of course. It's in other cities. I mean, in the suburbs of Chicago, you can call up and get a police report. You can't in Chicago. You can't call the Chicago Police Department and say, I need a copy of a police report. You won't get it.
Well, or I think one outlet got one and it was all blacked out or something.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, what you do is you FOIA them and you eventually get it and it's redacted and everything else. The odd thing is that we discovered, and this is in the last 9 months, they actually have opened up a portal where, to make it easier for people to get police reports that are involved, like if your car is stolen or something like that, and you need a copy of the report for your insurance. Well, they don't hold those up. I mean, they don't stop. Anybody can get those, but you have to pay for them. So if you call them up and say, I need a copy of a police report, they say you can't have it. But if you pay for it online, you can get a copy of it.
Gosh, I know. I mean, I live in Chicago. I know the idea that was all happening. So we're back to
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, it's just it is such a far cry from the way, and nobody wants to hear about the way things used to be. Okay.
Well, that's what you're here for. You're here to talk about the way things used to be. This is the interview.
Well, when I began all this grand adventure in Chicago in 1978, you could call up a police commander, you could call up a district, you could go walk into a police district and talk to the commander and say, what's up? Or you can make beat calls from the assignment desk and call each area, detective area, once every hour or couple hours and say, anything going on? And those guys were great. And they'd say, yeah, as a matter of fact, we just arrested a guy, that did this, this, and this. And you really want to know about that. And, his mugshot will be available soon and blah, blah, blah. That's gone. And what's more, even if something has happened, if I want to call, it was not unusual at all back in the day to call up Area 3 and say, I need the commander. And you get the commander and say, Commander, I need to do this story. Can I come see you? And he'd say, sure. Can you come at 11 o'clock? That doesn't happen now. Doesn't happen at all.
Well, also 70s Chicago was so different. When you say Area 3, I mean, that area has changed so much, but it just seems like a lot of things were haphazard and there was a kind of malaise back in the 70s and 80s. So I'm not surprised they're more open.
Well, yeah, but the thing is, we're not talking about some radical experiment in government here. We're talking about democracy. We're talking about the way it's supposed to be. I mean, and so I would argue that, look, let me give you a perfect example of this. A few weeks ago, it was in April, an individual stole an ambulance in the city of Chicago. He walked up, it was running on the street, and he took it. And this was down in Chinatown. And he led police on this crazy chase down the Stevenson Expressway, down 55, all the way down to central Illinois. The tires were blown. He was on the radio ranting all this crazy stuff. And finally, he was arrested. Well, there are a lot of issues there. Okay, why was the ambulance left unlocked? Why was it running? Who is this guy? What was involved? People could have been hurt. Nothing. They don't want to talk about it. They don't want to talk about anything. So we FOIA'd the video. We get the video. When the video we were finally able to get the video from OEMC, the Office of Emergency Management Communications. We just went to update the story. This is my colleagues last week. And they checked to see, by the way, what were the charges on this? Well, he was charged in Grundy County with possession of stolen city property. In Chicago, he wasn't charged with anything. He wasn't charged.
Do you know why?
Cook County State's Attorney's Office, we asked him, why wasn't he charged? And they said, nobody ever brought us the case. We asked the Chicago Police Department why, we sent them a note to their Office of News Affairs. Why didn't you charge this guy? That case was closed exceptionally, was the only answer we got. Why is that? No explanation. So you can steal an ambulance in the city of Chicago and you're not charged.
Well, unless he was related to somebody or some, this is Chicago after all.
Yeah, it is. Although I must tell you, I would love to think that that's the reason for so many things in Chicago, and we've seen it repeatedly. But this is a case where it's just, we didn't do it. We don't have to tell you why.
So when you were starting out in journalism, did you think things would end up like this?
No. I thought things would always be that way. I thought things would always be the adventure that it was. I mean, I started in Oklahoma in 1975, and from day one, I thought, man, this is the best way in the world to make a living. You get to go places and do things and meet people and take part in things that the general public doesn't get to do, and we're the ones that get to tell the stories. And my whole thing has always been, I just kind of want to know the things that people don't want me to know about. And really there are two things, that, and I also like to be able to take people places they're not allowed to go because they can't take everybody there, and kind of be their proxy and show them what they would see if they were.
And then, but okay, you started in Oklahoma, but you've been to a million places. Can you sum up what the heck you've been doing? I mean, you've been all over the world. You've been in peacetime. You've been in wartime. What are some notable experiences that you had? Notable stories that you covered?
Well, I've just been very lucky because of the great people I work with and the bosses that I work for really believe in going to the story. And so I've been to 3 Olympic Games. I covered the Gulf War, I covered the 91 war for CBS when I was at WBBM News Radio. I was there. I was in Tel Aviv for that. But in the ramp up to the Iraq War, I was in Kuwait City. I was there for 2 months, and was there when the invasion began, and then we were able to get up into Iraq. Back then, during that period, the base of operations was Kuwait City because Iraq was still Iraq. But once the border fell, you could make these trips up. A lot of people don't know Kuwait and Iraq are very close together. I mean, the distance from Kuwait City to the Iraqi border is about the distance from downtown Chicago to Evanston. So it's very close, So I got to do a lot of that. I've been to Israel multiple times doing stories about Chicagoans in Israel. I've been to the West Bank a couple of times, went with Daley to the Mideast. He went to Jordan and Israel. I've just been in countless stories around the United States for a lot of unfortunate tragedies, and that's sad. And also to tell some fascinating stories. I mean, to get to go just a few months ago, we went to the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms National Tracing Center in Martinsburg, West Virginia, where they trace every crime gun, which is an archaic process. Shocking. It's still entirely based on paper because of pressure from the gun lobby. The Congress mandated that they could never computerize their databases. And so there is no searchable database of guns in America. So when a crime gun is recovered on the street, for instance, the Highland Park shooter's gun, they look at the serial number, they go to Martinsburg, and they literally start pulling pieces of paper. It's still an entirely paper-based system. It's the same system that would have operated in the 1950s.
So we would never see chips in guns, so they can be traced.
Oh gosh, no. I mean, they're not even allowed right now. The center in Martinsburg, I'd urge you to watch our story. It's online, and I'm not doing that to toot our own horn. I think it's important that people know this. The center in Martinsburg has so many millions and millions and millions of records, and it's paper, that the floors in the building were collapsing. And so they had to start putting all the files in shipping containers in the parking lot. And they did that. And then they finally asked for permission to start scanning some of these records just so that they could have a better way to store them. And the answer they got was, okay, you can scan them, but not as PDFs. They have to be JPEGs. So they're not searchable. So they still can't search for a serial number. They have to bring them up on a screen and scan them one at a time on a viewer, not unlike the old microfilm machines. But at least those aren't as heavy as paper.
Well, just hearing you describe this, I mean, you obviously have a lot of insight and knowledge and experience. And I'm just wondering, you look really young for the years that you're talking about. So how have you not become jaded after seeing all this, all this horrendous stuff?
You are kind to say that, Margaret. While you do that, just let me do.
You and Bill Cameron. Bill Cameron also looks really good.
Hang on just one second. I've got to just answer a text to keep us from being interrupted. Just a second. Uh,
Oh yeah, and by the way, if anybody has any questions, they can text me 716-202-8255. That's my, I can get it on the
I'm
screen.
sorry to do this. This is the ultimate live show where I'm having to answer a text so that we
That's
don't get
fine.
interrupted.
Well, you are a working journalist and busy guy, and you've seen the world. So
Yeah, hang on just one second. Okay. Um, I'm 66 years old. Okay. 66 in September on
yeah, but you're not
9/11 is
66.
my
You haven't
birthday.
been sitting behind a desk for 40 years or whatever. You've been out and you've seen some of the worst of our humanity.
I have. I've seen some pretty awful stuff. And just when you think you've seen it all, you see Highland Park. But
That's horrible. Yeah.
you know, Margaret, you go to these events and you're working, and you're so busy, you don't have time to take it in. It's a little bit like it's like The Blind Men and the Elephant, that old poem. Each of the men thought that he knew what an elephant looked like just from what the part he felt. And it's for instance, I'll give you a perfect example. I was in Oklahoma City for the bombing. I was already, I was working at Channel 5, but they sent me down there. And of course, the coincidence was I used to work there. And so I certainly knew the lay of the land. But it was so overwhelming, and you're so busy, and you're doing individual stories each day, but you're not doing big picture. You're doing your piece of it. And it wasn't until, and I on my takeaway on all that was twofold. Number one, I've got a million stories about Oklahoma City, but I'll never forget. It's the first time I ever saw a reporter sitting on the curb crying.
Was it a local reporter or
A
national?
local reporter. But the other thing was, I was on the way home, and this was when print newspapers were still a big deal. And now, by the way, I endorse those newspapers, but they are electronic. But I had a copy of the Daily Oklahoman, and I was reading it on the airplane on the way home, and all of the stories that I had time to read, and just the enormity of it started to wash over me. And even as a reporter, I mean, the horror is just so awful. And when you realize that you have been to so many of those, I mean, I was at the Pulse nightclub, and I was in Las Vegas for the sniper shootings at that concert outside, and I've been to too many of these. And I totaled up my death toll the other day, and just at mass shootings, it's over 140 some, I think. And you just start to see the futility in the way that these are being approached. No matter what your politics are, nobody can argue that this is a successful strategy that the nation is employed on. And yet you go there and you've got to work. And so you just kind of tunnel vision through it. You go past it. The worst one of all was Sandy Hook. It was probably the worst place, the worst story I ever had to do. It was just when you allowed yourself to think about what you were covering, it was just so appalling and so horrible. And so, but at the same time, you're trying to tell what's happening. I mean, I have always said there are two things. When I talk to young journalism students, I say, news isn't very hard. News amounts to two things. Number one, something's going to happen, and you go there. A city council meeting, a police board meeting, a school board meeting, a demonstration, a protest. Or number two, you hear something has happened and you go there as soon as you can, and you observe it and you tell people what you saw. Okay. Now that's about 99% of news right there. The other 1% of news, which right now is what I do because I'm assigned to the investigative unit, is you take little morsels and nuggets of something, and you say, well, what's this about? And you dig into it and try to figure it out. And by the way, sometimes those become blind alleys. One of the great things about where I work right now is they allow blind alleys, and not all places do. Mm-hmm. They only allow sure things. News a lot of the time involves things that don't pan out. I've always said that, you want to remember that you're there to tell the story that you have, not the story that you want.
Mhm.
And very often, yeah, we've had some great stories, amazing stories. They just didn't turn out to be accurate or true. And
Well, did you get some kind of tip, or how come you led? Why did you lead? Why did you follow those stories?
stories come in through a variety of ways. By example, the hit and run accident series that we have been doing, and we're still doing, by the way, because there's just so much there, was because one of our producers, I work with some incredibly amazing producers, Katie Smizer, Shelby Bremer, Lisa Capitanini. And one of them noticed just this trend. Chicago's got an awful lot of hit and run accidents. Last year, over 37,000. And the clearance rate is absurd. It's like 130. So you look at this and you say, first of all, why are there so many? But secondly, why can't you solve them? And we started meeting all these people that the car had been left behind. It still had the license plates on it. Okay, so you know where the bad guy lives. Let's go arrest him. Maybe a year later, and they wouldn't have even interviewed the guy. What's that about? So in some of these, it just comes down to a simple matter of being curious about something and saying, this doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to me, and you in that particular case, we just had to present it to the viewers and say, it doesn't make sense to us, folks, but maybe it makes sense to you, but here it is.
Well, it's good that you're honest instead of creating some conclusion, because I think that sometimes that's why people don't like the media, because people they can't find, they face those gray areas, and then they make a conclusion. People are like, wait a second, no, that's not a conclusion. That's your view of the situation.
Well, I mean, and it is our responsibility to draw conclusions when they're there, when we can do that. I mean, to me, it's inescapable in some of these things that, for instance, there's one of these accidents that occurred at Pershing Road and State Street, and it was on camera. There's a school there, the Dawson School. The security cameras caught the accident. You see in the video, in the police reports, they reference the video. The perpetrators are seen getting out of the car and running away. So who the car is registered to. There's only three possibilities here. Okay, either the car was stolen, either the car had been loaned to somebody else, or the owner of the car was driving the car. And certainly the owner of the car would know two of those, either if he gave it to somebody or if it was him. And if it was stolen, he would have reported it stolen. So these shouldn't be complicated cases. And yet the clearance rate on them is probably among the most abysmally low in the city of Chicago of all crimes.
And so, but you did not find out why exactly.
Still not. And the old adage of shooting a fish in a rain barrel, it got to the point where we ran out of time to do any more examples. Everyone we investigated turned out the same. And I finally told my colleagues, we've got enough. I mean, we've got plenty here, because, every time we reached into the barrel, we pulled out a fish. I mean, every time we looked at an incident, it was the same story. There was one particular just unbelievably tragic case. Man was hit on a bicycle, killed, and the vehicle that hit him had the phone number. It was a commercial board up service, had the phone number emblazoned on the side of the truck. Still no arrest in that case.
Well, how did you get into investigative reporting?
I had been doing, you do different kinds of things. I'd been doing, very serious stories, along with a lot of features, but very serious stories. And about 10, 11 years ago, the NBC owned and operated television stations decided they really wanted to beef up their investigative product. They wanted this to be true at all of the NBC owned stations. And my boss asked me if I would be interested in doing that. I said yes. And that's how we got started. And one of the it's a blessing and a curse in one respect, and that is, they give you time to actually work on these stories, and I can't forget how blessed I am in that regard. I really am. I mean that, that you have days and sometimes weeks and weeks to work on these stories. But the thing I don't lose sight of is that I have a lot of colleagues that don't have that luxury, and they're walking in the door every day. As I don't have to tell you, we start every day with a blank sheet of paper, and that blank sheet of paper is going to be a 4 o'clock newscast, a 4:30 newscast, a 5 o'clock newscast, a 6 o'clock newscast, and a 10 o'clock newscast. And at 9 a.m., that piece of paper, it doesn't have anything on it. And great people are walking out of that 9 o'clock meeting with stories and being told, you're at 4 o'clock, you're at 5 o'clock, you're at 6 o'clock, and they're getting those stories done. And that happens day after day after day after day. And so I never lose sight of the fact that I have an unbelievably lucky position that I'm not expected to do that right now. Now, in cases where you have a major happening and they pull the investigative unit into us, as they should, Highland Park, good example of that, or others, then everything changes. It's all hands on deck. And we really, really believe in that. We think that's important.
Yeah, you guys did such a great job because they constantly went to the ground for the reporting. They didn't go so much back to the studio until later. But as it was happening, we were on the ground with the reporters. It was amazing. That's why I watched it for several hours that day.
Yeah. Now, and one of the things young reporters learn quickly is that while you're on the air, you're not doing any reporting, and that becomes difficult. Because while you are talking on television, you are not out gathering information. You have to service that appliance, and so that can become a major issue. You have to every now and then say back to the people in the control room, guys, you got to turn me loose for a while. I've got to go get some work done, and they're good about that. At least the people I work for are good about that. Between live shots, we found a doctor who had been an eyewitness and had actually helped tend to some of the folks that had been hurt and shot. And I called the doctor and I said, I'd like to talk to you. And he said, great, I'd like to talk to you too. I've got a lot I'd like to tell you. And he said, I live just a few blocks away. Well, I told the control room, you're gonna have to do without me for like the next half hour. I'm gonna run over and interview this doctor. We ran to the doctor's house. We set up on his front lawn. We have these gadgets that allow us to go live. And so we just went ahead and the next live shot we did was from his front lawn with him, and that allowed us to do a little reporting and do the live shot at the same time. And of course, then that interview was now recorded, and now we had material that we could utilize. Television has an insatiable need for product. It is for raw materials. Mm-hmm. I always tell people it's not unlike, building a refrigerator, but the difference is a company that builds a refrigerator has to, ship in so much cold rolled steel and, the compressors and everything else, and they keep them in a warehouse and they put them on an assembly line and build everything. We have to create all the raw materials every day. And so if you're going to have a story, you have to go out and get the story. You have to go out and get the nuts and bolts. You have to get the sound. You have to get the pictures. When they caught up, and I'm using a lot of examples from that story just because that's fresh. When they arrested Cremo up in Lake Forest, up on not far from the
41,
scene,
right? Was it US 41?
Yeah, on 41, heading back into town. It wasn't that far away, and I ran up there for. The main reason was I knew we could get pictures of the car, and and as it turned out, it was valuable.
Yeah, and that doctor interview was amazing. I saw it in so many different forms because he was describing the horror of it.
Yeah, and he was appalled, and I've used that word a lot. He was really, really shocked by what he had seen and what had just happened, and not so much what he had done. I mean, that was automatic. I mean, there was a need and he was fulfilling it, but he was saying, my God, folks,
it was like war.
These were people that are great, It's enough already. And he was pretty upset about that. And that was, I think, one of the reasons he really wanted to talk to us.
Yeah, and he was describing it like a war zone. He said,
he did. And he described, giving CPR to, I think it was a 12-year-old child. And that shouldn't be,
No.
I mean, that's not a memory that a doctor, and he's an obstetrician. That's not a memory that an obstetrician should ever have to carry with him.
Yeah, speaking of memories, when you went to these different areas of conflict, etc., how do you get that out of your mind?
You don't, you just kind of move on. I mean, it's, if every police officer had to deal with every trauma of every shooting scene he went to, I don't think he could do his job. And I think a lot of us kind of go on autopilot. You're so focused on the task. You're focused on what happened here. What are the facts? How many shots were fired? How many, I mean, at any scene, how many people were hurt? Where is the perpetrator? Was there more than one perpetrator? And then also you're focused on just the logistical part of it. Who's going to talk to me? Who knows the information? Where are the eyewitnesses? Does that guy really know what he's talking about? Are there pictures? Oh, that guy's got cell phone video. We need that. Well, how do we know it's real?
Right.
And all of that stuff is happening in real time. And against this backdrop, the one thing that you don't lose track of is that the clock's running. I always tell people that your biggest enemy is the clock, because that show's coming at you like a freight train, and it's down the road a ways. It might be 10 a.m. now, and your show's not on the air till 4 o'clock, but it's going to get here sooner than you think. And if you're going to do a package, we call them packages. That's what a TV story is called. If you're going to do a package in the 4 o'clock news, it better be in editing by 3. It takes about an hour to edit. That means you better be screening your video by 1:30, 2 o'clock at the latest, so that you can have that in your editor's hands by 3 o'clock. And, you're thinking constantly kind of backwards about what are my deadlines, and you're setting those deadlines in your head, but at the same time, you're trying to gather all the information you can. And, then you'll be thrown a curveball. You'll think everything is fine. And then suddenly, the local police in whatever town you're in will announce they're going to do a 4:45 press conference, or and you're on it, and you're at the top of the file. So, there are a million different little things that are constantly going on, and you've got to take all of those things into account, because it's very important to remember that television is a collaborative process, and you owe it to your colleagues who you're collaborating with. You're sort of the mouth of the funnel. I mean, that editor wants that thing because he's got to edit that spot. He needs it in his hands. You can't say to him, well, I got to wait for the police to talk. No, he needs to get started. We'll put the new information in somehow, but we need to get started on what we can do, And I learned that very early on. Margaret, I mentioned I've led something of a charmed life. Channel 5 is the first television job I ever had. And I mean, I've worked in exactly one TV job, and it's the one I'm in now. And don't I know that I'm lucky because of that? Because before that, I was a radio reporter. And I learned very, very quickly that you are best served to get stuff out of the way early if you can.
Yeah, well, a couple questions. I mean, you mentioned the eyewitnesses, and how do you approach eyewitnesses to share their story?
You do it. It's interesting. I'm always amazed at the fact that people largely want to tell their stories. If they have seen something, that I think a lot of it has to do with adrenaline. They're running on adrenaline too, and they've just seen what happened. And you just walked up to them and you say, sir, I understand you saw this. And they say, yes. And then you say, mind if I talk to you about it? And they say, sure. And you turn around to the cameraman and say, go. And you say, sir, first thing off, give me your name. Rule number 1, get their name on camera. I have a terrible memory, and I'm notorious for forgetting a person's name after I leave. And so you go back, and if his name's on the video, at least you know who you talked to. And by the way, I mentioned that it's important to make sure that you know that what you're getting is genuine. Now, in the age of social media, one of the things that we have learned about is, you'll be flooded with material. If you have a major happen, a terrorist attack, a tornado, a mass shooting, suddenly a lot of photos are going to start cropping up online on social media. Well, it's very, very important to note, you got to make sure those things are real. And NBC has very, very strict policies on this, on authenticating photos and on getting rights to photos and making sure that you have those rights. And let me explain two things around that. Number one, first of all, you got to make sure they're real. I'll never forget, we got spectacular video one time of a tornado, really high quality video of the tornado. And one of the folks in our newsroom ran it, really knew how to search this stuff, ran it and found that same tornado hitting a city in Kansas 2 years before. And then that same tornado had been used by another news agency hitting a city somewhere else like the following year. And that was the most well-traveled tornado in the world, and it just continued to wreak havoc. Well, it was phony. And so at some point it had been a real tornado, but people kept sending it around saying, yeah, this is the tornado. So we are very cautious about that. That's number one. Eyewitness video is something that we are very, very careful about. And then number two is rights. And that is, we always, if we get video from someone on scene, we have them give us a release right then, right there, standing on the street. They have to give us a release for all of the NBC platforms, because there are many of them. Not only NBC News Channel, NBC local stations, affiliates, owned stations, Telemundo stations. So as a result, there are so many platforms, they have to have unconditional license to use the video. And one of the other issues that we have encountered is that there are these secondary aggregators that will snag good video. And so you might have video that's good, that right now a guy says, yeah, you can use it. And then he'll go off and sell the rights the next day to one of these aggregators, and they'll come after you and they'll expect royalties. And so you've got to be very, very careful with it. There's been video that we have had in the past, and NBC Standards will send out a note in our internal system says that video of such and such, it's no longer usable because it has now been signed to a third party.
Wow. So I was thinking maybe the release would include that, some kind of.
It does. But sometimes what's happened is that these people have paid them for the video. We don't pay for video. We don't, I was wandering out of your shot here. We don't pay for any video at all. We don't believe in that. So as a result, somebody might get thousands of dollars for a video, and in that particular case, you've been outpriced on something like that. And by the way, I want to caution you that I don't know what I'm talking about on this. This is done by smarter people than me, right. And I'm just on the user end of this. Right.
Yeah, well, you're not an NBC lawyer or whatever.
No, but we have some a whole bunch of those guys and young ladies, and they do an amazing job.
So you mentioned going from radio to TV. Why did you make the switch?
It was a great opportunity. I didn't do it because I wanted to work in television. I wanted to work at Channel 5. And I know that sounds trite. I was in a great job. I was working at WBBM News Radio, and we were a great operation back then. I started there in 1979. And I was there for 14 years, and it was really, really just a remarkable operation. An army of reporters. We broke lots of stories, and local assignment desks in Chicago had 2 radios on their desk. They had a police radio and they had WBBM, and I was proud of that, and I thought that was going to be my job forever. The Channel 5 was doing amazing reporting. I had friends that worked there. Paul Hogan was a great friend of mine and was a wonderful reporter. Carol Marine, and I'll never forget, Carol did a story about a woman by the name of Deborah Gedzius, who was accused. She had had a series of tragedies in her family involving deaths of children. And Carol did a story on that indicated that the Cook County Medical Examiner had botched the way those cases had been investigated. And it kind of broke the case wide open. And I remember looking at my wife and saying, I want to work there. And I was lucky because an opportunity came to work there, and it worked out very, very well. That was in 1991, and I'm still there.
All right, I have a question. I know I don't want to preface it by saying this might sound dumb, but I am doing that because it is a strange question. But I've noticed that in the media, because I worked in the media for over 15 years. And I've noticed that certain people, usually women, get breaks in certain situations. I swear I've seen this, and they're not even on camera because of how they look. Okay, so let's say it's somebody looks a certain way versus somebody else, and then the door opens because they look a certain way or whatever, or they act a certain way. And I'm wondering, on the guy's side, does that happen?
It certainly hasn't happened for me. I mean, look at me. But I can't vouch for that. I mean, okay. I don't.
It doesn't matter what guys look like on TV.
Well, everything matters how you look. I mean, yeah, let me defend something for a second here. We're still in the business of selling newspapers. Okay, it just happens that our newspaper is electronic. There's a reason the New York Times has photographs in it. It makes for a more compelling product. Okay. And you want your product to be packaged in a way to be attractive to the purchaser of the product, and in our case, the viewer. And I mean, sure, you could do the newscast sitting on stools in the middle of the newsroom and do it in black and white. But I don't know that a lot of people would watch that. You want that show to be attractive. Now, let me just give you a crazy example. If you're out in a windy situation, okay, people always go after us for our hair. Okay, and I'll let that sink in for a second. And this hair is attached to my head. Okay, if you have a piece of your hair, let's make it do this, and it's doing this because it's windy, and you're fighting it, and you're doing this while you're trying to communicate information, that's all people are going to see. Let me give you a different example. When we do an audience show, if you do a show with an audience, one of the first things you tell the audience is, don't chew gum. Okay? And here's why. If you take a shot of an audience and one person is chewing gum, it sticks out like a sore thumb. And that's all the people see. Okay? So if you've got something wafting around back and forth, television exaggerates things. And so what do? You glue it down so it doesn't do that. Okay. I'm not doing that to make myself look great. I'm doing that because it's annoying and it's distracting. And we're trying to present information, and we're trying to do that in the best way possible. So some of this stuff is just sheer practicality. Now, if somebody was just profoundly unattractive, will they still get a job in journalism? I think they will. I think you could argue that there have been some really, really amazing reporters that have managed to transcend looks just because of the amazing product they put out there. So I think a lot of that is, frankly, I think it's overblown. I mean, look, they hired me.
Well, because it's even behind the scenes, I've noticed that. I wanted to ask you, because you've been in the media for so long. I'm wondering if that changed over the years, or because it seemed like, I remember back a long time ago, there were some anchors that were just in the newsroom, and then over time there were backgrounds. But I'm just even talking about behind the scenes, because it seems like there's certain people, this doesn't happen all the time, but I've noticed it, that it seems like there are certain people and doors open up for them because of how they act, how they dress, how they present themselves, even though they'll never be in front of a camera.
You mean support personnel, producers,
yes.
Writers, that kind of thing?
Yeah. So I'm talking about in front of the camera. Of course, people should look good, because people who watch these things want to see good looking people. But even behind the scenes, I've noticed that. Is that something you've noticed?
I have not. I have not encountered that. And largely, I think the makeup of our I can only speak for my newsroom. Makeup of our newsroom looks like any other business there is.
Yeah. So what's the difference between doing radio and TV?
Well, it's interesting you asked. There used to be a tired old expression back in the day. It was hear it now, see it tonight, read about it tomorrow. That was supposedly the difference between radio, television, and newspapers. Well, of course, that model's gone. Radio's pretty much been ruined. And there's very little radio news left, and so my hat is off to those that are still doing it, because I still have deep affection for radio news. Radio is interesting because I'll give you an example. When I was at WBBM News Radio, if you were out covering a building explosion, your first report was the second you drove up, and you weren't actually packaging up recorded spots for a good time, a good period, and then you're going live and live and live and live, and at WBBM, for example, it's every half hour. So the difference there is it's I always used to liken working there to Lucy in the Chocolate Factory, where that conveyor belt's going by and they're wrapping up the chocolates. It just is endless. The all news radio has an insatiable need for product. But the difference, of course, now is that television is kind of there too. And there have been two advances. One was live television and minicams, and that allowed us to go live all the time. We now use a new kind of technology, which is bonded cellular technology, which is a gadget. It goes by different brand names. We use a gadget called a Dejero, Dejero. And what it has is, and my numbers are bad on this, I'm sure my technical colleagues would correct me, but let's say it's got anywhere from 7 to 12 cell cards inside the box. And it's very simple. It takes the television picture, it splits it, sends all those back to the station on down cellular paths, and then it's reassembled at the other end into an HD picture. And so as a result, if you can get cell service, you can get a live shot up. And that's pretty much what we use all the time now over microwaves and satellites, because you can pretty much get a cell service anywhere in the world, with few exceptions, as long as you're not somewhere where there's a huge demand. You don't want to use it in a sports stadium where everybody's going to be firing up their phones at once. But so that has enabled you to do what we did in Highland Park, which is just go and go and go and go and go on as much as you want, as often as you want. But the other technical advance, of course, has been the internet. And so as a result, not only are we servicing the television product, but we're also servicing an online product that's on all the time and has no deadlines. The deadlines are right now and all the time. And they need information, they need product, they need pictures, they need sound. Good example is election night. I was down at Darren Bailey's headquarters in downstate Illinois in Effingham. And, Channel 5's election night coverage was on, at 10 o'clock. But we had a show on the air on our website at 7 p.m. and it was a real newscast. It was in every sense of the word, with a studio and with anchors and with continuous live shots. And so, there's no rest for the weary on that one. I mean, I did more hits for our website that night than I did for Channel 5.
What do you think of the changes in technology over the years?
I think they're good and bad. They're good because they allow us to reach a wider audience. The bad thing is it doesn't require the stuff to cook as long. And and a lot of stuff goes on the air that's not cooked. And I don't agree with that. A lot of stuff and I'm not speaking of us, I'm talking about the world. Okay. I do believe that one of the advantages of the pre-internet was information would come up and would be run to ground, and you'd see if it was not only accurate or inaccurate, but important. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that's true that just doesn't matter. It's interesting, but it really doesn't affect the story that much. Now everybody's watching you build the car at every inch of the assembly line. And so as a result, a lot of that stuff that in the old days might have been jettisoned, say, yeah, this was good, but I don't need it. at 11 a.m. you learned it and it went on the air. And so I think that perspective is important, and some of that's getting lost because of the tremendous demands of the 24-hour news cycle. And I'm not the first person to observe this. Everybody laments that. I'll give you a perfect example. Sports writers. You talk to a sports writer and he'll tell you that one of the worst things of his job is going to a game now. He said, we used to actually be able to watch the game. He said, I haven't watched a game in years, because he said, I'm too busy updating the website.
But then a long time ago, though, when you got into it in the 70s, did you foresee all this technology and the changes in the business?
Oh God, no. If you would have told me back then that we would have this ability to do this, I would have said, wow, that's pretty remarkable. I mean, I can remember BBM, when I worked at WBBM, that was a really, really progressive operation. I mean progressive in the true definition of the word. I mean, it was very modern, very forward thinking, and also very innovative. And so as a result, I can remember when we first, long before we got video display terminals to write on, we had an experimental thing with UPI that we were using. Was one single terminal in the newsroom, but we could pull in anywhere that UPI operated anywhere in the world. And for a local station in Chicago, that was pretty remarkable, And then, of course, when the first video display terminals went in, and we used a system back then called NewsStar, it was wonderful, because it enabled it almost instantaneously. We were typing on manual typewriters at WBBM, and we went instantly to.
Did you wear hats and smoke cigars?
Well, they had banned smoking in the newsroom, thank God. But the number one, the noise level went down. It doesn't sound as much like a newsroom. But number two, man, right there on your screen was, you'd have wire copy, you'd have what you needed to write, or you'd have the facts that were sent in by, say, a reporter at City Hall, to write stories from. It was a pretty amazing process, and it changed the business overnight to be able to do that. Ask anybody in a newspaper if they didn't prefer writing on a VDT than writing on a typewriter and on copy paper, that they had to try to figure out how many column inches they were working with.
And earlier you said that you speak to different people, or you give advice and so forth. And I do know somebody whose class you spoke to, and you said, do not get into the business. My advice is do you really feel that way?
Well, let me tell you what I'm concerned about right now. And that is, I'm concerned about where the business is going platform wise. And that is, there's no doubting that a lot of people that are coming to adulthood right now are getting their news from other places, and they aren't necessarily getting it from the most responsible places. Facebook is not a place where you should be getting your news. Instagram is not where you should be getting your news, because anybody can set themselves up with an Instagram account that looks pretty slick, but it's not a newsroom, it's his bedroom. And I'm very, very concerned about that. I'm concerned about, I'll give you a perfect example of this. I was at IRE, the Investigative Reporters and Editors Convention, a few years ago. This is probably 3 years ago. And I was listening to a fascinating program with Dean Baquet from the New York Times. And he's responding to a question from the audience. He said, we are not a newspaper anymore. We are a 24-hour online news service. We put out a newspaper, but that's not what the New York Times is anymore. And the thing people don't remember is that what all news comes down to is product. It comes down to content, and content has to be created by people, and that's expensive. Those people need a salary. They need benefits. They need vacation time. And so as a result, I am concerned that everybody wants all this for free. It's not free. It's an expensive proposition. Again, as I alluded to earlier, the raw materials of news are made by news operations every day. We create the product from scratch every day, and it's expensive. The technology is expensive. The just putting gasoline in the cars is expensive. I remember Walter Isaacson made a great point one time. The former Time magazine editor and great author who's written best-selling biographies. He was trying to figure out.
He wrote an excellent biography of Steve Jobs. Everybody should
Steve Jobs and also Benjamin Franklin. He made a good point. He said when he was a kid growing up, I believe he grew up in the South. He said we all like to go fishing, and we'd go down to this creek where we loved to fish. And on the way down, we'd pass this little roadside grocery store, and we'd always steal a bag of ice because he said we thought ice should be free. But it never occurred to us that the water that went into the ice cost money, the bag cost money, the guy that froze the ice had to be paid. There's money involved in making an ice cube. Well, it's perfect analogy for news. Everybody who thinks, well, I think information should be free. It just doesn't work that way, because how is it going to be paid for? And so the thing I'm concerned about is where that end of it is headed, because some places have managed to monetize this. I believe the Washington Post has done an amazing job of finally figuring out, cracking that digital code of how to monetize it. I believe the New York Times has done that. Sun Times is talking about dropping their paywall. I saw that story the other day. I'm curious how that's going to work. I think people forget one thing, and they think news is free. They watch television news and they say, well, I didn't pay anything for that. No, but the advertisers did. Those things you see during our newscast are commercials, and that's what enables us to do what we do. But if people believe that they want a product that's going to be non-commercial, that's not going to have ads, and that they don't have to pay for, it's got to be paid for somehow. And going forward, I am concerned about that as we see hundreds and hundreds of, especially newspapers, going out of business. And it's shocking that that's happening. That I think it's important that when this thing shakes out, there's still somebody watching City Hall, getting a product out in those communities that people are consuming and that they are paying for. Because more and more, and look at the shocking things that have happened to the Chicago Tribune, more and more of those operations are shrinking. And you get into especially smaller towns where a newspaper consists of one person. And by the way, the recipe for tyranny is that. And there are only too many politicians rubbing their hands together saying, thank God nobody's watching this anymore. And I think that that is a bad model for us to be aspiring to.
Well, you were talking about, content. And one thing I think about, there's this book called Fighting for Air. And this guy wrote, he's an academic, Eric Kleinenberg, I think his name is. And he was talking about VNRs, video newsreels. So he was saying, when you watch this, so what do you think about that?
I'm not familiar with his product,
he was just analyzing the media, and he was talking about how there is money and basically the owners don't want to use it, et cetera, et cetera. But the VNRs, I had no idea that those existed because I've never worked in TV. Were they more common before, like 20 years ago or 30 years ago?
No. They do come out. Although I must tell you, we don't see this kind of thing that often. We are very suspicious of private content like that, and we don't like to do that. I mean, if we want to do a story on that, we're probably going to go shoot it. Okay. Occasionally you'll get a video news release. I mean, I can give you absurd examples. If a new baby cheetah is born at the zoo, okay, and so Brookfield Zoo will send out video of the new baby cheetah. That might make air, and it'll have to be emblazoned on the air with, credit for they're the ones that supplied the video. Anytime it's video that we don't shoot or it's not supplied by us, it has to have some kind of credit on it to let the viewer know that it came from someplace else.
So so the fact that you went to this class and you said, my advice is do not get into the business. Seriously?
Well, no, and by the way, let me tell you what I believe, and I don't remember that. You have to refresh my memory what that was. But let me tell you what I believe. And I mean, let's just have that class right now, okay? And that is, get into this business. We need good people. We need really responsible, good reporters who want to get out there and find the truth about things and tell great stories. Because at the end of the day, what we have to do is tell stories. But there are a couple of caveats I have about that. Number one, you're not going to get rich. Okay. Number two, make sure that you're telling your stories in a place that people are going to hear it. I used to teach a class, and this was back in print days, and I used to tell my students, it doesn't matter if you've done a great story if it ends up in the bottom of the bird cage, because the only person who read your story is the bird. So I'm a very big believer that you want to work someplace where your product is consumed and where you're getting out to the public and you're getting it into the hands of the people that need to see it or hear it or read it. Okay. So a lot of these very, very niche sites are terrific and they're doing good work, but they don't have a lot of exposure. And I'm concerned about that because I think good journalism and needs to get out there. Now, on the other hand, there's more innovative stuff being done right now than ever before. You know, I want to see it survive. I want to see it thrive. I want to see the public consuming journalism the way they once did. And by the way, and Margaret, we can talk about another thing that just is a concerning peeve of mine, and that is point of view journalism, which I adamantly object to and refuse. I mean, the one thing I do tell students when I talk to them is, if you think that you're going to get into journalism because you want to change things for and then insert your group, whatever your ethnicity, your sexual persuasion, your gender, your religion, you're in the wrong business. That's not your job.
Well, I call that activism because I have noticed that with certain stories, instead of it being just reporting and journalism, to me, it's activism.
Yeah, I mean, that's not what we're here for. We're here to tell stories and to find facts and to put them out and go on to the next story.
But do you think that Watergate had an effect on journalism? Because sometimes I wonder if people saw that and they thought, yeah, I'm going to change things by finding a story that I could blow things open about.
Well, everybody wants to blow a story open. I mean, and there's nothing wrong with that. But what I'm saying is that you're not in this business just to because you only want to do stories about your gender or your race or your religion. That if anything, that's a disqualifying factor. That means you have an agenda, and you know. And by the way, I've raised my hand on things and said to my boss, I'll give you a perfect example. In the community where I live, there was a disaster that happened, and I was asked to MC a fundraiser by the mayor. I was happy to do it. I cleared it with my boss. But then after that, a story came up that involved that disaster and the slow pace of insurance coverage on that. I was too close to it. I went to my boss and I said, I can't do this story now. It's where I live, and number two, I can't be perceived as having any agenda. I can't afford to have an insurance company come forward and say, didn't you MC a fundraiser for those people? So I took myself out of it. I recused myself, not unlike what would happen in the courts. It's very important that happens. And so I think there are some people getting in that say, I'm getting into this business because I'm going to change things for blank. That's not what we're here for.
Well, yeah, I'm asking of Bob Roberts, who worked at news radio for many, many, many years.
Good friend of
a
mine.
Reporter. Yeah. Oh my gosh. He said, you know how sometimes they'll have some media thing and then they'll offer food and so forth. He says he doesn't pick up anything because he said, yeah.
Yeah. I it's interesting. I mean, I'm uncomfortable voting. I don't like doing anything that smacks of expressing an opinion, taking a side. It's not. When I was working at BBM, I had a news director named Joe Durso, and one time I remember he sent out a memo, and he was quoting an old crusty reporter who was covering maritime hearings on Capitol Hill, and it was about fishing rights and really dull. And during a break in the hearings, somebody said, "Well, what do you think of this so far?" And he said, "Well, I think it's kind of interesting, but I'd kind of like to hear from the fish." and that's always kind of stuck with me. You always want to hear from the fish.
Gosh, that's great. Yeah, it reminds me also, of course, that saying, if your mother says she loves you, check it out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because
the old city news adage. It's absolutely true.
Yeah, because somebody will tell me something and then I'll have to confirm it. Like one time somebody told me that was something that was so wild, and I still am trying to confirm it. Not for the news, not for news radio, but just for me, because it's so outlandish, but I have not had anybody confirm it. So I'm sort of that's my little project in Chicago right now.
You know,
But
Margaret,
anyway,
one of the greatest moments that you'll have in this business, and I've had it, and it's wonderful, and that is when you have stuck to your guns on a story in the face of what everyone else is reporting, and it turns out they were wrong and you were right. But their story was better. You know, their story was sexier. Their story was more sensational. And you've got a lot of eyeballs saying, "What's the deal? They're reporting such and such." And you say, "Yeah, but they're wrong." And then it turns out you're right. That's a pretty good feeling. Mm-hmm. And so it pays a lot of that. I would rather be right than first, number one. And number two, right in and of itself is what we're here for. The information in and of itself is what we're here for. Don't get me wrong. I love breaking stories. I love reporting things before the competition. We all love that. We all love getting the beat on stuff, but you don't want to be wrong. In fact, Pete Williams, a colleague of mine from NBC News, and just the best reporter I know, had a notable, and he just retired last Friday, but he covered the Justice Department since 1993. And he had a notable day like that when there was a ruling at the Supreme Court on Obamacare. And every other news outlet was reporting that Obamacare had been overturned. And Pete was on the air saying, actually, that's not true. The ruling actually was just the opposite. That it had survived still another challenge in the Supreme Court. Well, it turned out he was right. He'd read the opinion and he knew what he was reading. And I'll give you another example of that. During an appellate decision on Rod Blagojevich, one of our competitors misinterpreted the appeals court ruling and thought that it said that Blagojevich was going to be released from prison. And I was on the air reporting what the appeals court decision said. We had busted programming and we were reporting it. And it wasn't what I was reporting, wasn't what I had read. And I'll never forget, I got off the set and my boss looked at me and he was like, "Did you know they're reporting this?" I said, "Yeah, they're wrong." And it turned out we were right. And he was 100% supportive of me. And when you've got a boss and a management that supports you at times like that, that's when you know you're in the right place.
Yes, it reminds me of being a lawyer, because lawyers have to check every little thing. You can't just skip the steps, and you have to check every document, et cetera. And
yeah, it's funny. I was talking to somebody today about Nexus, the database we use to find people. And, you know, I was explaining that Nexus is a great database.
Are you talking about LexisNexis, that one?
Yeah, LexisNexis is.
Oh my gosh,
Lexis is more the legal end of it. Nexus is the public database. It's a subscription service that you use. We use it to find people. And also to go back and hang on a second, my computer's wanting to update itself, and I'm just going to tell it to
is that a PC?
To stop interrupting me. Hold on a second. Okay. And I was explaining to Nexus is a great service. Yeah. We use it all the time, but it makes mistakes. And so as a result, let's say you have a big event. You've got a terrorism attack or something like that in someplace, God forbid, and you get a name and you pull up the name and you nexus the guy and you find out all kinds of things about him and who his neighbors are and how old he is and how many kids he has and stuff like that. That's great, but you may have the wrong guy.
Mhm.
Okay. And so all it is a tool. And so what I was stressing to this person today is it's just the first step of, then you're going to work your way up until you've actually confirmed that everything you have is accurate and true. And truth is the only thing we have.
Mhm.
Truth is what we're here for. And man, if you're wrong, you're in big trouble. And being wrong, I'll never forget something that just chilled me to the bone. There was a tragic incident that happened here in Chicago in the 90s where a group of employees were herded into a back room at Brown's Chicken in Palatine, and all of them were executed. And
there's a book about that. I know some former reporters wrote that.
Yeah, it was a horrific crime. And I was on it and was out there for days and days. And one of my friends, but a competitor from another station, came out with a big exclusive on the story about a suspect. And I'll never forget, I looked at him and I said, "Boy, great story." And he said, "Yeah, I sure hope it's true."
Oh gosh.
And it
Oh my
wasn't.
gosh. Ugh.
It wasn't. It was inaccurate. And so you don't want to be in that position. You're better off not reporting it at all. And what I'm saying to you is that we have been in a situation where we have had that story. We have had a story like that. And we have said, boy, this looks real. This looks promising. This looks like something that we would love to get on the air, but we don't have what we need to do it. And we didn't do it. And there's so many stories like that that have been left back in cold storage, and they're still there, have never been used.
Well, what's a good way to fact check?
I mean, you check. I mean, you check everything. You have to have good sources. You have to have investigators who are willing to talk to you and have to be right, because sometimes they're wrong. Okay, you have to know that witnesses or people that are confirming information are in a position to actually confirm it. They say documents don't lie. Largely they don't, but sometimes they have inaccurate information. We have a saying we have an investigative guru with our company, and she runs seminars on data mining, which is, man, there's so much data out there that is a source of so much great information and news. But she has an old saying she uses: all data is dirty.
Ooh.
So even data has flaws. So you just have to make sure that what you're reporting is real.
Well, I think about, the Tiger Woods story. You're talking about the media, because I remember he was not really open with the media. And then people would approach the sports media and they'd say, I saw him with such and such. Like, they tell him about situations, and the sports media people were like, okay, well, this source doesn't really seem reliable. They seem sort of sketchy, but those sources were correct. It's just that the sports media didn't have the ability to confirm what was told them.
And that happens. Sometimes you have something that you don't have the capability of confirming, and then it turns out later to be true. That's happened lots of times. And you wish you could. You wish you had that last piece of confirmation to get it out there, but you cannot take that risk. Oh, by the way, Margaret, I just committed the cardinal sin of journalism, and that is I didn't plug in my computer, and it just sent me a note that said, "Your battery is low."
Oh gosh.
I can get my battery, but I don't have it in this very room with me. I mean, my AC cord. I'm operating on battery instead of AC power.
Well, what John Dempsey did was we weren't live streaming, but he walked with his phone to another room to deal with something, and then he went back to another room or something. He switched, but
I'm on a physical computer. This is oh.
We can continue on your phone anyway. So yeah, so I do want to ask Phil, who I've never met before, and I don't know at all. I wanted to ask him about some more advice he had, and I want to ask him what he's learned and, how to create a good story, how to write. It's really hard. But if anybody has any questions, you can chat with me. And I have gotten questions before when I've interviewed people or comments. And you can also, seriously, you can text me because that's a Radio Girl text. The number is 716-202-8255. And I want to see if there are any comments on Facebook or anything. Let's see. Okay. But yeah, so he's walking away. This is the problem with live streaming, is that he has to get something. So, but listen, I'm still looking at Facebook to see if there are any questions or comments. Let's see. Okay. Listen, I'm still looking at Facebook to see if there are any questions or comments. And I'm looking at Twitter. On my Twitter is Radio Girl Pod. And this is also streaming on another Twitter, which is Metrolingua. That's the name of my business, actually. And I have a blog called Metrolingua. But also, while he's gone, let's see if he joins. I'm going to pause this for a second. Also, while he's gone, I wanted to say, if you have any questions or comments, you can email me at margaret@radiogirl.us, and of course chat. But let's see. Gosh, that's strange. Okay. I'm going to email him. Let's see. Hold on a second. Oh, here he's back. Okay. I was gonna email him to see what's going on, but I don't see. Hello. I was giving them my contact information. Because I've had this.
I want you to know, again, I consider that like what would I tell students? Always be prepared. Always make sure you have a pen.
And also always back up everything twice. So
yeah, but I didn't prepare because I thought my battery was good to go.
Oh, it's fine. But yeah, I was going to say, other than learning that you need a battery, what are some other things you learned in the several years you've been in the media?
A lot of it is just stuff we've talked about. I mean, the one thing I used to always tell people when I was at BBM, and for a brief period at CBS, I was in management, and I used to tell people, go, always go. I mean, if you hear something's happening, get out the door.
Yeah.
Two things. Number one, the worst thing that's going to happen is it turns out to not be true, and you'll just turn around and come back. Okay. But the longer you wait, if it's real, the more you miss. And a lot of that stuff goes away. Witnesses go away, pictures go away. And that's all stuff that you talk about. The early bird gets the worm. You want to be at the scene of something as soon as you can. Okay. So also get in, get close. A lot of the time they're gonna put up a perimeter. They're gonna close it down. So you want to get to places as quickly and as early as you can. I can give you examples where that's paid off, and I can give you examples where we were late to something because we were somewhere else and it took us a long time to get there, and it was horrific. I mean, God, I'm still haunted by the Northern Illinois shooting, which the problem was it was in, it was way out there in DeKalb. And so as a result, it took forever in rush hour traffic to get there. And all the while, the story's happening and you're missing it. And so this is the kind of thing where you go. It's funny. I had a meteorology professor in college when I was at Oklahoma State. He came in on the first day of the class, the very first day of the class, and wrote on it's a chalkboard, everybody. He wrote on the blackboard, "Weather moves."
That's true.
Okay. It stuck with me to this day.
Yeah. So there are a few lessons like weather moves, ask the fish, or let's find out what the fish think.
And go. Whatever. And just and the go, word go.
But there's this other side of it, because some people, I think because they see the highly paid people on national TV and they think, oh, I want to be an anchor. They don't necessarily want to be a reporter. Why do you like being a reporter?
Oh God, I love being a reporter. I love being out there. There's no news made in newsrooms. You want to be out where the news is, people get that thing out of their system pretty quickly. And I always tell that to interns. I say, come on, you're going to come with me. We're going to go, we're going to go to the toxic waste dump. You don't want to just sit around the newsroom all day. I mean, you want to go where the news is happening.
But some people just want to be on the air. They don't necessarily want to be out there getting the information. They want to receive the information and read the teleprompter or read News Boss and report. And the anchor.
I got to be honest with you, and I can't vouch for the shops, and I'm not trying to toot our horn too much, but every anchor I know at our place also does pretty good reporting, and to a person wants to get out in the field and do stuff, wants to get out and tell stories, wants to get out and report stories. Now, by the way, resource-wise, that's hard to do because television requires camera people, and rightfully so. They do amazing work. And so you're assigned to work with a photographer. It's a one-to-one relationship. And so on a lot of days, there just aren't enough of those to work with all the reporters and all the anchors. Okay. And so they have to parcel that out as best they can. So that's why you don't see an anchor reporting a story every day. That's just that a lot of that's a function of resources. Plus, don't forget one thing. Anchoring is tough. I don't do it, frankly, because it's not something I'm good at. And the people who are really good at it, you want them doing that. They're telling stories. They're telling it in a compelling fashion. Fahey Flynn, God rest his soul, he's a longtime anchor at Channel 7, one of the most beloved figures in Chicago. I don't know that Fahey Flynn ever reported a story. I don't think the viewers cared.
Right. And how do you construct a story well, especially under tight deadline?
My friend Paul Hogan used to say, you've always got to get them into the tent. Okay. So you want to try to tell it in the most compelling way that you can. In what I do, which is investigative journalism, you got to make sure it's not too complicated. I've always said the best investigative stories are the simplest ones. And so, sometimes one of the most important things that you've got to do is leave stuff out. There's a tendency to try to throw in everything you know. And that can be a mistake because it clutters the story. You want to make really good use of sound, and you also want to make as little use of yourself as possible. I don't really like the sound of my own voice. I'd rather hear other people. So I tend to write stories around sound, and you've got to make sure that all the reportage is there, but at the same time you want to make use of the materials that you've got. I'm also a very big believer that you don't they always say write to your pictures, but I don't think it's necessary to point out pictures. I don't think it's necessary to say, see, this is a smokestack. The viewer knows it's a smokestack.
Unless they're just listening, but yeah.
Yeah, but by and large, that that's not the way people are consuming. It's interesting. That is the way CNN launched. When CNN first launched, they hired a ton of radio reporters, and they did that because they wanted it to be a service that people could have on in the background.
Like I said, is there anything else you'd like to say?
I love it. I love the business. I think it's such an important business. I think what we do is so important, and I'm not being self-important. I'm saying that on behalf of everybody who reports the news, whether they're doing it in print or broadcast or wherever they're doing it. I think there are any number of people that don't want us to do what we do, and that is the best evidence that what we do is important. And if we ever get to a day where this job is the exception to the rule, I think we're looking at a very bad day for society, because you only have to look at some of the major stories that have come out in Chicago recently. Look at the stunning investigation that the Chicago Tribune did of the red light camera deal, and how it stunk to high heaven, and people ended up going to jail because of the Tribune's work. That's where great journalism, that's where the rubber meets the road. And those are the kinds of things that the people need to know about, because it's their money. When you're paying for a house, your property taxes, that you're paying maybe in your mortgage every month are going to support that government. And you want to know that that money is being spent wisely by people who are good stewards of it. And the recipe for disaster in that scenario is to do away with the people who are watching the process.
Oh yeah. I just thinking about the process, because when I think of Daley, I've lived in Chicago for several years and I grew up in Evanston, but when I think of Daley, I don't exactly think of the most upstanding situations. And why do you think, why was he, I don't know if you agree with that, but why do you think that he was more transparent about police situations?
He was more transparent about a lot of things.
But then there are other things, he sort of had these deals going, and like the
and
iron
by the way,
fences.
I've always had a theory about that, and this is just my opinion.
Yeah.
I'm not supposed to have opinions. But I always thought a lot of that stuff had to do with Daley's impatience. Daley would see, he was famous for his love of wrought iron fences.
Yeah.
And,
which are rusting where I live, but go ahead.
yeah. But Daley would see an area that he wanted wrapped in wrought iron, and he would say, just do it, call that guy and have a fence put up. Well, it didn't go out for bid. It wasn't done through the proper channels. He knew a guy that could do it fast. Did somebody benefit from that? Probably. I always thought his motivation on that was that he was just impatient and wanted it done. Okay. He was a Daley who I always, if you'd known him, you would have liked it. Okay. And he's still with us. But Daley had an extremely short attention span. And
his news conferences were so funny.
Yeah. And he actually enjoyed those, but he had a very short attention span. I'll never forget, we were with him in Jordan, and we were at an event where he went to the Queen of Jordan had a children's center in Amman, and we were there, and the children were putting on a program, and we were shooting the program of the children performing, and we were doing a cutaway of Daley watching this, and we couldn't get a shot of him watching. He was rolling his eyes and looking around the room and stuff. And I went over to his press secretary and I said, would you please make him pay attention? And she said, he's bored, he doesn't want to be here, he wants to leave. Well, that was just him. That was the way he was. He wanted to move on. He wanted to go to the next event. He wanted, but there was another side to him that I would see. And I remember I was with him one time. We were on our way to China, and it was for, no, I take that back. We may have been on our way to Rio. It was during the run up to the Olympic bid, and it was the middle of the night. It was a long flight. And I was up, and I was convinced I was the only person awake on the airplane, and including the crew. And who's up? It's Daley. He's up. And so we get to talking, and it's dark and 777. And I'll never forget him going off on just this long tangent about the schools in China and about how he was convinced they were going to overtake us. And it was one of the reasons he wanted Mandarin taught in the Chicago public schools, because he thought Chinese was the wave of the future, and he wanted the Chicago students to be prepared for it. And he was passionate about that. Mm-hmm. And so he had things that he was really focused on, and he would really argue vociferously, and he really believed in. Was he a politician? Of course. His last name was Daley, for God's sake. But I actually thought that some of the things that he actually advocated for were things he actually believed.
Like the parking meters. Yeah,
that was a mistake. That was a flat out mistake, and it was one of the worst things that the city of Chicago ever did. And it is that, and the Chicago Skyway were done virtually simultaneously, and I think just about everybody agrees that was not something that was very well done. I have long contended that parking is one of the biggest scandals in Chicago. I do not, and I'm talking way before the parking deal. A lot of people don't remember this, but after the Luke flood, they yanked all the parking meters out. And
wait, when was that?
Oh, it's 1992 maybe. And as a result, parking rates skyrocketed in the city. And I frankly, I think it's tragic that a family that goes to the Field Museum on a Saturday has to pay $35 to park their car. I think it's absurd.
Well, the thing about Daley is that I really felt like he loved the city. I mean, I was working downtown. I was living on the northwest side and working downtown when 9/11 happened. And I thought, my gosh, his response. I mean, you could just a lot of things that he did. You can tell he knew the city, he loved the city. He thought about like he's the one who really beautified the downtown, etc. So
Yeah, and I agree. And I think if you look at what's happening downtown right now, I'd sure be interested to know his perspective on that.
yeah, I live downtown. Yeah, me too.
Because
I don't know the guy at all. I never see him or anything.
I think it's disturbing what's happening in downtown Chicago right now.
Well, I live here and I did write a letter to the Tribune that got published actually about basically downtown's not a war zone because I live here, I work here, I've been here the entire time. So, but that's another topic.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. My argument on that is that one shooting on Michigan Avenue is more than there used to be, and so as a result, nothing will cause a trend more than perceptions. And there's a perception that crime has increased in downtown Chicago, and I think that that's a concerning thing. And I think it's something that, frankly, the administration has not addressed very well. And I do know that downtown merchants are very, very concerned about it because they believe crime is up downtown.
Yeah.
And a lot of them have talked to us about that. And so I think that there has to be a balance between what the perception is, what the reality is. And, you need citizens and tourists to believe that Chicago is a safe place.
Yeah. I mean, I literally am outside every single day. I'm going to go outside right now and walk around like I do often. I walk to work. I work downtown. I did not escape to anywhere during the beginning of the pandemic. So
Neither did I. I've been at work every day.
yeah.
I've been
But
at work in the NBC tower every day. I didn't leave.
okay, so I walked by your place many times, but also, I mean, I'm not one of these people like I didn't go to the suburbs. I don't have family to go to. I didn't have anywhere to go during the pandemic time. So I was here the entire time. So I guess I'm more positive than other people about it.
I think that's
I
good.
believe in it. Yeah.
I think a healthy dose of optimism is good for us.
Yeah. I mean, I believe in it. Plus, I came downtown in the 70s and 80s. This is what I wrote in the Tribune letter. And it was way worse. And you had to constantly look over your shoulder. You couldn't wear any bling or anything. It's not like downtown's perfect, but we live in a dynamic city. So, but I don't have any power or any kind of persuasion. I just wrote that letter and hopefully people will pay attention to it. I can send you a link to it.
Information is power. The best thing in the world is if people are actually reading what you write and their minds are being changed.
Yeah, but I have some opinions I don't want to say here, but I have some other opinions about it that I want to share. I'll share with you off the air. But okay, so anything else you'd like to say before we get off? Because I mean, there's so much there. You've had so many experiences that.
No, I've just been, look, Margaret, I've been tremendously lucky in my career. And I'm an old guy. And I've flown with astronauts. I've been shot off of aircraft carriers. I've driven a submarine in the Pacific. I'm a lucky guy. And I got to do all of that because of what I chose for a career. And I wouldn't have traded this for anything. And the best part about this job is telling people things they don't know, showing them things they've never seen before, and telling great stories. Because at the end of the day, what we do is tell stories.
Okay, I'm stopping. All right, stop.